Welcome to React Roundup. I am your host, Jack Harrington this week, and with me are my esteemed co-panelists, Paige Niederinghouse.
Hey, everybody.
And TJ Van Tol.
Hey, everyone.
All right. Very cool. So before we get into this week's episode, I'd once again like to invite everybody to jump onto the Discord server and jump into our Discord channel. It's linked to in the show notes. And yeah, just ask us any questions you want or have any comments about what we talk about. Been talking about ham and pineapple pizza lately, so
debate.
Things like that's not even a debate. I'm in. I'm sold. You sold me on it. All right, so yeah, join in the fun.
Hey folks, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been working on actually building out Top End Devs. If you're interested, you can go to topenddevs.com/podcast, and you can actually hear a little bit more about my story, about why I'm doing what I'm doing with Top End Devs, why I changed it from devchat.tv to Top End Devs. But what I really want to get into is that I have decided that I'm going to build the platform that I always wished I had with devchat.tv, and I renamed it to Top End Devs because I want to give you the resources that are going to help you to build the career that you want, right? So whether you want to be an influencer in tech, whether you want to go and just max out your salary and then go live a lifestyle with your family, your friends, or just traveling the world or whatever, I want to give you the resources that are going to help you do that. We're going to have career and leadership resources in there, and we're going to be giving you content on a regular basis to help you level up and max out your career. So go check it out at topenddevs.com. If you sign up before my birthday, that's December 14th. If you sign up before my birthday, you can get 50% off the lifetime of your subscription. Once again, that's topenddevs.com.
Okay, so this week, we do not have a guest, but we are going to be talking about I would say, it's a big word, ancillary skills associated with web development. And we'll just kind of throw in our thoughts on these things. And I'll kick us off that I think a really important thing for React devs to learn outside of just React is really get into CSS. I've seen a lot of folks try to use the components too much, and they don't learn like what's underneath them, like things like learn Flexbox layout, grid layout, learn all the different ways that you can do layout in CSS. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. Learn animations, because I think people jump right into things like remotion when all you want to do is like a fade. There's decent CSS animations out there, oftentimes built into the CSS frameworks that have no name, like Tailwind. And then also media queries, things like, just make sure that you understand like how to just do a native media query, because the framework is basically doing all of that for you. And if it doesn't do that for you, then there's no reason to go and bring in a whole bunch of stuff. You just use some basic CSS. So just understanding those kind of things.
Is another basic, how about just display block versus inline versus inline block? Just like, It's amazing how often that comes up, and how lots of times beginners just don't even understand the concept of what those are even doing as well.
Yeah.
Kind of related to Flexbox.
Yeah.
It's great when you can take a component library like Bootstrap or AntDesign or Chakra or any of those libraries and kind of use it as a starting point. But I can guarantee you at the very least, you're going to want to change the colors to match whatever your site's colors are, or your brand color if you're working for a company. And most likely your designers are not going to want to do whatever the defaults are for those components. Even if you've got nice looking drop downs and text boxes and whatever, you're almost guaranteed that margins and padding and text link colors and all these buttons will be different than what is available out of the box. So knowing how to style those and change what they look like, if not build them from scratch, is, I would say, critical to anybody who wants to be a front-end developer.
Totally. And if you're using like a CSS preprocessor, like SAS or Less or whatever, like when you jump onto the project and you're starting to say, I'm going to do front end of this project, and you see that, just spend a little bit of time learning all the little commands, because they have things baked into most of those frameworks, like lighten, darken, all that kind of stuff, so that you can make relative colors, and then when you have like your base color set, right? And then you have like a bunch of, this just needs to be darker contrast. So instead of like literally hard coding the hex value, you actually, no, that's that value, but darkened. And then when you can change it in one place, and boom. And they all do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even to take a step further back, probably my biggest CSS tip is for people to just take CSS seriously. I think
yes.
Lots of times JavaScript developers will just look at JavaScript as the real code, and CSS is something that you kind of have to throw together, and just once it looks good, great, but they don't think about why what's happening is actually happening. They don't treat it as actual code that needs to be reviewed and cleaned up and whatnot. And just in general, I feel like if you take it seriously, you'll start to learn some of the underlyings of how it works. You'll get less frustrated with it over time. You'll just be more capable at what you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. A big sign that you're going to get whipsawed around by CSS is if you get a lot of bugs on your code about responsive. Like, oh, this works great on desktop, but on phone, it looks like terrible. And you're like, I don't know. I just took the stuff that the designer gave me, the CSS, and I just smushed it in there. I don't know how it works. Like, don't blame me. Like, you don't want to be that person. You know, you want to be the person who's like, okay, or up front does it right.
So another thing that I would throw in as something that you should know that is not necessarily React or JavaScript focused is how to write automated tests. Because this is one of those things that a lot of people are resistant to testing, but as we get more, as we get further along in web development, it just becomes more and more of a requirement. You have to be able to write unit tests, integration tests, end-to-end tests, one of those, many of those, some combination of them, and being able to figure out how to set up a testing framework and then actually use it and test the things that you want to is pretty much a requirement today, like I was saying. So get familiar, even if it is just writing a few tests, with how to go about selecting a framework, how to set it up in an existing project, what kind of syntax it needs, because it's probably going to be something that you will either need to provide as part of your build process in a company, or it'll be one of your steps in your build pipeline. So, just get familiar with it. It's going to only help you.
It's going to save your butt. Exactly. Yeah. The question, I'm sure we could talk all day about which EDE, whether it's Cypress or whatever, which EDE framework to use. But I guess my question is, for you, how much do you EDE and how much do you unit test?
So I follow the testing pyramid, which has been established, I think, by multiple people at this point. But it's basically end-to-end tests are the things that I write the fewest of, but they're the most comprehensive tests because they are supposed to go from the time that a user starts using your application to the time that they're done, and all the things that they could do in between. But typically there's only a few of those because they take the longest to run. And then unit and integration tests kind of are the things that I write a lot more of, but they cover a lot more of the edge cases that you would see for particular interactions between various components. So that's where you would test things like, does this error occur when I pass in a bad value? Does this error message get triggered? Or when I render this component, are all of these buttons visible, or things like that? So very much the big, heavy, expensive tests of end to end, I write the fewest of, and then the integration tests, which run quickly and they're headless and, need a lot less in the way of setup, I tend to write the most of.
Mm-hmm. I think too, with any of those sorts of setups, the more you can automate, the better, because you want to put yourself in a situation where writing tests is convenient so that you actually do it, versus if it's a painful process, you're going to be less likely to do it, ship without your tests and whatnot. So any automation you can add is definitely a plus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the trick is you don't want to get to the point of like 100% coverage though, because then, your application becomes so stiff that it's really hard to make even minor changes and have it still work. And the other caveat I put in is kind of don't use the snapshotting. I know it's super easy, but to snapshot, some dialogue or something, and you snapshot the text in the dialogue, and then your boss is like, hey, we want to change, an and to an an a whatever, and next thing you know, you're breaking unit tests on and they're like, no, this is not good, man. You can't break the build on that. That's crazy.
I feel like knowing what to test and what to not test is very much an art that there's definitely good stuff you can read on it, but some of it is just you have to experience, like you have to write flaky tests to identify flaky tests.
Yeah.
Because Jack, clearly you've written that test before. Like I can tell that was not a hypothetical story.
I'm lazy. I'm lazy as hell. It's like, oh yeah, snapshot. That sounds great. Let's do that. Like I don't have, but then you realize that like, yes, now your code's at 100% unit test coverage, but like, but wait a second, when these tests break, it tells me nothing. It literally like, this test broke. Okay, well, why did it break? Well, the test is basically a test snapshot, and you're like, well, so yeah, you should really just go in and make sure that like, instead of using the snapshot, go in and test the specific things that you really care about. Like, did this data value get computed and put on there, in some place,
Yeah.
Like, did you calculate the total of the cart or whatever it is? That's the test. Like all of the little, like, did the CSS values, like the munging CSS class names equal no, right? Who cares, right? There's a whole different thing for like E2E tests that do visual comparisons, which is like a whole weird area.
Yeah, that's still, that whole visual regression testing stuff is something I've never gotten into. It seems useful, and I've definitely seen where it could have been helpful when stuff has gotten really, really wrong looking, but it's also something that I don't really want to get into.
I'd love to have a guest on sometimes that really knows that and could like walk us all through it. Like, hey, here's how to do this in a way that is not nuts.
Well, speaking of nuts, I can transition to the first one that came to mind for me, which is DNS, because I feel like that's a topic that as a React developer, you don't have to know every day, but knowing some background of how it works. And I could even expand that to like DNS and just HTTP in general, the basics of how that works, how requests work, how different things like A records work is not something that's going to come up necessarily day to day, but having some background on there is super handy. Like if you need to spin up something quick, having an idea of how that works with hosting providers can be just a handy little skill to have.
That used to be a classic interview question. Like, how does that, when the user hits your link or your URL, like give me every step to the server and back, and down to like the DNS stuff.
It can come in handy, like when you're trying to debug a problem and you want to know what layer the problem is happening at. Just knowing the basics of how requests flow around the internet, and I don't think anybody that is a front end developer needs to know this stuff like in and out, because you can go all in and fully DevOps and you can go deep.
It's DevOps.
You can go deep with this stuff. And I think if you're the type of person that wants to do React, wants to do front end, that's probably a little bit overkill. But just knowing how to set up a basic site on a host, like with some really, really simple A records and how that site gets accessed, can just come in handy. Yeah.
If you don't want to deploy everything on Netlify, where you have to think about none of that.
You still have to think about some of it if you're setting up a custom domain on Netlify. So
yeah.
If you haven't already started a bad habit, start buying up some domain names and then just figure out how to get a hosting server to point at them.
Oh my God.
It's like a rite of passage for every web developer.
It is. And I still hold my breath every time I change those things and hope that it works correctly.
Right. And this is when you get like all those little $10 hosting, or DNS bills or whatever. Or, at the end of the year, you get like a $300 domain name renewal thing. You're like, all right. Yeah. Fantastic. Those are the bad decisions I made coming back to get me.
Yeah, I registered my kids' names as .com domain names years ago, and it seemed like a cool idea at the time, but I've never really done anything with them, and I still pay the bill every year when it comes in, and I'm starting to really question why I even did this at all. But
don't feel bad. I pay my daughters like $6 a month, like Minecraft host thing.
Oh yeah, I pay that
years ago, and I don't think she's used it in like 6 months. So, and whenever I say, "Hey, can we get rid of this?" She's no. Like, you haven't used this in once. So back on the DevOps thing, I would say, yeah, definitely know at least some serverless, like have deployed something, in the serverless model, but also spend a little bit of time understanding like Docker, because I think Docker is still super vibrant out there. And in fact, actually, I think like Docker just came out with something in the CI/CD space. I want to say called Dagger, which is basically, it's really cool. It's actually like, well, you know how like every CI/CD is different? Like GitHub CI/CD is one thing, and then GitLab CI/CD is something else. Dagger is basically trying to unify that. Like you have a CI/CD, you can run it locally. Whoa. And then then you put the Dagger configuration up on whatever hosts Dagger, I guess. And there you go. Now and so you can actually test your CI/CD without having like the whole host. Oh my God, the check-in list of like, now I'm trying this value, now I'm trying that value, and like fail, like, and finally get the green light. You're like, yes.
Yeah.
I think I just saw a conference talk on some work Visual Studio Code is doing to try to make Docker, because they have really good Docker integration now. And they're doing more to try to make it simple so that you can set up a repository with just like little configs, and then VS Code will take care of everything else, like setting up your whole environment. It's based off Docker, so that's what they're using under the hood, but they're trying to make the whole part of setting it up, like the whole Docker container specification, which is a little bit of an ugly mess. They're trying to help clean that up a little bit. So it's getting easier and easier to set up that sort of stuff, and it's becoming approachable for people like us even to dip our toes into it.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I love Docker when it works. Setting up Docker containers is not fun, and it's not something that I'm very good at. But when somebody else has done it for me and it just works, it's fantastic.
I like that. Yeah, when you get onto a project and they've got like a Docker development setup, so you don't actually have to do all of the the DB install and blah 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 blah. It's just like, okay, just hit Docker and there you go, you're good.
Yep,
it's really nice.
The last thing, just before we move on to the next one. So I've said DNS and HTTP, but I think along with that, I would also include caching, which was part of HTTP.
Oh.
Yeah.
Which can get a little bit hairy, but if you really know how those HTTP headers work, it can get you out of a lot of confusing bugs that you're almost guaranteed to run into. Like, why is my CDN holding on to this? Why am I still seeing the old value? It's pretty much a certainty you'll hit that at some point in your career. So just knowing the basics of how some of those cache headers work and how to use the browser tools to read them can be super valuable as well.
I'm going to pull TJ. TJ, what is a CDN?
Yeah, content delivery network, right?
A distribution or delivery, whichever.
I get tied up. But basically, it's like somebody else's server CDNs are specifically designed to distribute static assets, or at least they usually are. So it's oftentimes a place where you host your HTML, your JavaScript, your CSS on a server that's carefully constructed to deliver those things super fast. And normally, those types of sites put cache headers that last a very long time. Like, part of the whole reason for using them is you want users to get stuff fast. So usually you want to cache those values, and they have some way of busting the cache by like changing a version number in the URL or something. But things do go wrong with those processes, even if you're using tools like that. And so knowing a little bit about how all that works, or at least like, I can't remember the syntax myself, but I've dealt with it enough that I know like the things to Google and the things to kind of look for, which honestly, for a lot of what we're talking about this entire episode, that's really the depth of understanding we're kind of talking about is,
a lot
of this stuff you don't have to like have memorized. If you ask, like, put me in an interview question right now and ask me like all the HTTP headers and what they do, I couldn't do it, but I could like find around Google, like know roughly where to look in the dev tools to kind of poke around at it. And I think that's kind of the depth of understanding it probably is worth striving for.
Hi, this is Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and lately I've been coaching some people on starting some podcasts and in some cases just taking their career to the next level. You know, whether you're beginner going to intermediate going to advanced, whether you're trying to get noticed in the community or go freelance, I've been helping these folks figure out how to get in front of people, how to build relationships, and how to build their careers and max out and just go to the next level. So if you're interested in talking to me and having me help you go to the next level, go to topenddevs.com/coaching. I will give you a 1-hour free session where we can figure out what you're trying to do, where you're trying to go, and figure out what the next steps are. And then from there, we can figure out how to get you to the place you want to go. So once again, that's topenddevs.com/coaching.
Paige and I were talking about this before the show, and like I was like, oh my gosh, like the really good engineers I worked with in the past always have like a notebook, like actually a physical notebook or some sort of way or virtual notebook where when they research something like this, they just keep notes on it because you forget, right? Oh, I'm going to look into cache, whatever cache values for HTTP, and I'm going to come to this understanding of it, but like later on, you're going, oh, do I need to relearn all that? Well, at least, you've got this thing that you can go to. So I strongly recommend doing that. Not that I do that myself all the time.
Well, or you could make YouTube videos on it. I mean, that also works too.
Oh my God, I do. Yeah.
Or write blog posts, right? Like it's amazing how much I have quite literally referenced blog posts I've written years ago because it was something I ran into, completely forgot the details and looked it back up. So whatever medium that works best for you, paper, pencil, or something
including
virtual.
Medium.
Yeah. Exactly.
But that's a great idea. Oh my gosh. That's like, we've talked so many times on these episodes about how, get your name out there, get some blog posts. Mm-hmm. It's a brilliant idea.
I've seen some people.
Well, that's where I get a lot of my best blog posts that I write about is just stuff that I've had to learn at work. And then I'll just take a quick note of it in a Word document that I keep on my phone of like new blogs to write in the future at some point. That's all it is.
And if you don't want to turn something into a full like complete like blog post, there's other places you can put them for just quick notes. I've used GIST, GitHub's GIST, GIST for quick little things because those are searchable in the future and you can make them public. So if you put out a little tip and you like, hey, I think other people could benefit from this, you can make it public. Other people might find it and use it too. And if you want it to be private, then you can there's a simple button. So,
and I've been seeing a lot of code pens lately when I search for very specific things. It seems like a lot of people are making really nice little example code pens of stuff that seems like it, or stuff that probably is covered in documentation somewhere, but also you want to take it that one step further to do, X, Y, Z that's slightly different. And that's been quite helpful, just being able to fiddle around in those and test things out and try them. So good on you people who are actually putting up those examples.
And good on you people who do that and also put those on their resumes. Because man, there's nothing I like more in a resume than like some code I can click on and go to and just see. I don't want to go to your GitHub. I don't want to go I will go to your GitHub, but I'm not going to go and clone your repo. But Code Sandbox, boy, because it runs right there. You want to show me some cool stuff? Show me some cool stuff.
Or it doesn't. And that tells me all I need to know.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of these things rot, right? Like
they do.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Especially the bleeding edge stuff.
Yeah. That's the worst though. I've been in the Svelte documentation a good bit lately and there's tons of it, which is great. I'm really happy that Svelte is so thorough, but there are a few things that have broken. So you look at the console of the Svelte demo and it's like, I can't find this thing. And you're like, well, crap, how do I find it if this Svelte demo doesn't know how to do it?
Right.
Either?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Svelte, Paige, are you on the list for the next one or shall I jump in?
Go ahead and jump in, Jack.
Okay. All right. So I would say the next one I would look into is API styles. So there's GraphQL, there's REST. I mean, in some ways there's gRPC and TRB. Well, gRPC is its own thing, and then gRPC, and then I guess WebSockets as well. I have seen, I get a lot of questions from beginning developers, and sometimes the frameworks, particularly Next, can kind of hide the fact that there is this differentiation between the server and the client, and those aren't the same thing. And they'll get into this notion of there's no, the state is automatically synchronized. It's like, no, that's not how that works. You're not a desktop app. You're on a client server app. And so understanding the different protocols, REST, the different flavors of REST. GraphQL, I think, is, again, fantastic. And then if you want something in between those two, like TRPC, if you're in a TypeScript, is great. Although you don't need to use TypeScript. It just creates a REST API. So you can still use that stuff. But if you're on TypeScript, it's just better. And then if you're in a world of media and gaming, you definitely get some gRPC as well, device control. So there's a kind of a little subgenre there. But if you guys are going to learn two, I'd for sure learn REST and GraphQL.
Yeah, and I feel like even at bigger organizations, it's pretty common for front-end people to get involved with the API design, because oftentimes front-end will know how the data is actually going to be used. And so it's important to have some like constructive feedback in terms of how you want the data to come back, how you want to send the data. So if you know the basics of how the backend is structured ideally, or how APIs can be best reused, it can be very, very useful.
Well, and if nothing else, being able to understand how to set up a server in JavaScript, like a Node.js server of some sort, is going to very likely be beneficial to you. Because yes, there is Next.js, which kind of does it for you, but pretty much any other front-end framework that you pick up, whether it's React or Svelte or something else, you're going to need to fetch data from an API. And the tried and true method of that is through a Node.js server with Express or Happy or one of the many backend frameworks running on it. But knowing how to set up those routes and actually connect to that API in a safe fashion where you're hiding keys and secrets and things that should not be sent on the client side or visible to clients is really important.
Yeah. And also, I guess that kind of gets you into the world of monorepos, because oftentimes when you have like you've got your Next app or your Create React app or whatever, or your Svelte app, and they're talking to an API, but that API isn't part of that project, then you have it in the same repo, right? But in a different directory, in different project. And then understanding all the mechanics of like, okay, so if I want to just run it, then, making sure that both the projects get compiled and both the projects get run. They're on different ports, and so that they can
there are no CORS issues.
There's no CORS issues. Exactly. Even on localhost. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and that kind of ties into another one, which is not only knowing how to at least interact and kind of find your way around backend applications or pieces of an application, but also to know how to interact with databases. And it could be NoSQL databases. So it could be MongoDB, which seems to be everybody's favorite if you're a JavaScript developer, or it could be SQL databases. So MySQL, Postgres, the list goes on. There's a million of them at this point, but just knowing how to connect to them, set them up, write queries for them, use an ORM if you want to, which will basically write your queries for you. Those are all things that you're probably going to need to do at some point or another, or at least want to know how to do when faced with something like that.
Certainly. And knowing which types to use, like when you want to use a relational database, when you want to use a document object database, what the advantages and disadvantages are of each. There's no one true winner. That's why we still have both, Mongo and Firestore. And then on the other hand, we have Oracle and all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely handy. I have to admit to being like, I try to avoid databases like the plague. That's one career decision. It's one of the reasons I went into front end development is my brief forays with databases were not fun times. But I have to admit that knowing the basics of how to throw together an SQL query or whatever, it's going to come in handy. Even for debugging, I'm looking into a front-end issue. It's like, crap, is this my problem or is the underlying data bad? I might have to go into the database, run a quick where clause, get back things and compare it to what I'm seeing to kind of differentiate. So having those skills, even if you don't know the in-depth bits of how a database works, I have to admit is kind of handy to have.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of, I guess, TJ, that kind of goes along with what they were talking about, like on the HTTP side, like understanding the entire chain from your up on the UI all the way through either the REST or the GraphQL, actually back to the database or back to some microservice or whatever, and being able to like put in a probe at each one of those levels, like, hey, is that number right? Coming out of the microservice, or okay, because it's not right on the UI, so it's got to be somewhere in between those three and being able to poke in there and debug. It's kind of like, being able to fix your car. It's like, is it spark plugs? Is it, we're going to run out of gas?
Battery,
Is this something is this something I can fix myself or like,
or take it to the shop?
Or in which shop do I take it to? Right. Like that's the other thing too. Cause I got to figure out if I know this is a database issue, well, maybe I have like database people at my company or whatever. Right. Versus I don't want to annoy them if it's not that problem and whatnot.
Sure. Which Slack channel do I put this in? Because you don't want to get the microservices guys going, it looks fine to me. It looks good on my machine.
Yeah. That's like the 2020s version of that phrase.
Right? Which Slack channel? Or if you're unlucky, which Teams channel? Oh, my God.
Or Discord.
No, Discord's great. I love Discord.
Discord if you're lucky.
Oh, Teams. I can't even.
So I can take the next one, and that is Git, or just source control. Maybe you're using something else.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
I feel like that's another one that a lot of us have a love-hate relationship with, but Git is it's a tool that you almost use basically every day as a developer. You probably should be using every day if you're not. And it's once again, like you can almost have an entire career on Git because you can get in the weeds at some point, but knowing how to do things that are like one step beyond the basics, like how to do rebases, for example, how to undo your work, how to like cherry pick, how to move things around branches, having a basic understanding of what's going on under the hood can be super valuable. You learn how to like save off your work, how to keep other people in touch of what you like, how to collaborate most effectively, how to keep things from getting like in the way, knowing how to integrate changes, like deal with merge conflicts, coming up with a workflow you're comfortable with and that's consistent at your company. Like all of those things I feel like are super important and valuable. And it's another one of those too that like, it's probably worth investing. This will kind of flow in with what we talked about with CSS, but it's worth understanding what's actually happening versus like, oh, hey, this worked. Let me just move on with my day. But like knowing like if something didn't work, right? Like trying to figure out why it didn't and learn what you need to do in the workflows, because understanding those sort of things will come in beneficial if you do truly like grok how these processes work and don't just accept like, well, the right thing happened, so let me just move on with my life and get back to the next year issue or whatever.
It's weird though, because I've done the actual like I'm going to spend a week figuring out Git thing in my life before, and then just 100%, well, not 100%, but like 95% lost all of that knowledge. And it's so tough. Like it's very, very environment specific. Like, some work environments I've been in really push Git. Like there's lots of branches and there's whole conversations about branching strategy and
naming,
merging and naming and, all of that. And then another company is just kind of like, everybody checks in the main, let's go. And, it's like, whatever. Push to prod. Woo. Yeah. Let's go.
I mean, I think like with any of these tips, like, you want to be learning stuff that you either are A, interested in, or B, have a need at work. Like that's the stuff that's going to stick, because you don't want to like, I wouldn't recommend going to the Git documentation and looking all the commands and just like reading through them sequentially. You'll hate yourself within like, but by the time you get 10% down the list. But it's more that if your company has a process like, oh, hey, we rebase, we do interactive rebases before we merge, right? Like, well, if that's part of your work process, then it's probably worth knowing how that works and how to do those really, really well and understanding the process. But I wouldn't go out learning Git commands just to do it. Like, make sure you have some reason for going down that path.
Yeah, I know about a handful of Git commands off the top of my head, and they're the ones that I use every day. Like, I don't rebase very often, so I always have to go look that up. I don't reset heads very often, so I have to go look up that syntax. I don't change repo origins very frequently. So all that stuff that you do once in a while, maybe it's good to write down a note about it so future you can thank past you for doing it again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
there's only a handful.
I'll point out though, like you knew what to say there, right? Like you knew what to Google, you knew what to look up. And that's really like the key to all of what we're talking about. Cause I don't know half of that stuff either, right? I don't know who has that in depth of a memory that they're remembering the specifics, but if you've done it before and you like either have notes or you just have some bit of a memory of where to go and what to do, it can be extremely valuable.
Yeah. And another one that kind of is along the same lines, TJ, is learning a little bit about the command line, because you're probably going to be in terminals. And I actually had the opportunity at my last company to take like a week-long command line in-depth tutoring thing where it was a whole classroom full of us just learning all about Bash and shell scripts and all that good stuff. And it was super helpful. And then I went back to my regular team and forgot probably 75% of it, even though I'd taken great notes, which I can refer back to. But honestly, knowing how or knowing where to look to go to write shell scripts or do things along the command line in the future is beneficial. Knowing how to copy things, how to print out what's in a file, how to move a file or make a folder. Those are good things to know how to do, because VS Code is great, but you got to start with something for VS Code to open up before you can get to that.
It's also amazing what you can automate with those sorts of scripts as well. Because I've had to do this a couple of different times. Like if you know the syntax for like actual Bash scripting, it's incredibly powerful, but it's also like a syntactical nightmare.
Oh, it's line noise.
It's chaos. But there are some tools that allow you, like if you just know how to write a Node script, and there are tools in Node that let you just execute arbitrary like shell commands. So you could do that and automate some processes that would take a long time to do manually. I've done that sort of before, where like I need to move some files around, or I needed to do some image processing on a set of images that I was working with. And I found a little script that would do what I wanted that kept me from like having to manually touch each image. And I just like wrote a loop that's like brought in each file and like ran that command line thing and ran it on the 1,000 images or whatever. That saved me from having to just honestly, it would save me just the monotony more than anything. I probably spent more time writing the stupid script than it would have taken me to change all the images, but at least I didn't have...
No, 1,000. No. There's definitely there's these cutoffs of 10 files, I'll do it by hand, 100 files, 1,000 files, no.
Yeah.
We're doing a script.
Well, I was working on Pokemon image files, so I know for a fact it was around 800 at the time.
808. Yeah, exactly.
So.
Yeah. I think I know exactly that Pokemon DB, by the way. And it's grown. Yeah, my daughter tells me that there's many new expansion packs to be had.
Is it the API that everybody likes to use for demos and stuff?
If it's the same one, it's like 800 and something. My copy is 808 because there's all some of the characters have like special names, like Nidoran with a little male symbol on it or something. And I just scrape those out because I'm like, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with you UTF-8 encoding stuff. Whatever. Goodbye. Goodbye, Nidoran. I don't care.
There is an API. There are GitHub repos that people have graciously put out like a lot of work to put images of all of these together. And I found one of these images because I wanted to get into the stupid domain names. I have a domain name that I use. I've registered for doing this.
Oh my God.
But anyways, I have all these images, but I needed them to work slightly differently. And I can't even remember that this was several years ago. So I can't even remember the exact problem. But I was like, oh, these images are so close to what I need, but I just need to tweak them this little bit. And so I ended up writing a script to do it. And maybe saved time, maybe didn't. But in any case, I learned something new.
Right. It was fun.
Yes.
If memory serves, that API is awful, by the way. It's like the worst of REST. Yeah, because in order to get if you search by name, then you get a response back that just has the ID and then the name, and then you have to make subsequent. And you're like, well, yeah, what do I want to show, like the hit points or whatever? And you're like, no, you've got to make like a request for every one of those to get the hit points. And so no, it's like the worst. It's like it's just REST at its most evil and terrible.
Well, see, because API design, you had
right.
There you go. Yeah. Like this whole episode is coming around.
Build a better one.
Yeah. Right? Well, that's why I'm not.
That's what he did with his shell script is write better ones.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why I ditched I'm not using the API itself, but I am using the underlying images which were provided because the images themselves are great.
Oh yeah, and then they make for awesome like thumbnails and stuff. Like oh look at this.
Yes.
Yeah, I like the movie database API for the same reason. It's like I pull out all the movie poster images. It's great for demo apps. Looks great.
Oh yeah, that's true. That is better than Pokemon for sure. Actually, yeah. So I will say for those of you at home playing the home game, if you're on Windows, use the Windows subsystem for Linux. Yes. And then you get access to like all the good shell scripting stuff. And, because you don't want to automate. I mean, I know that there are folks that do like PowerShell automation on Windows. And it's like, this is nasty. I mean, okay, fine. I'm sure PowerShell fans are that's the thing. Let's bring this all the way around. Jump into the Discord channel. Tell me I'm terrible for saying that PowerShell scripting is terrible.
That Windows is just terrible for development in general.
Yeah, I will go that far.
Yeah, no, and there's the line.
There it is. Yeah, I'm with Paige actually, but that's fine.
No, Windows is not that bad, but the Linux subsystem makes it a lot. Easier to work with.
Yeah, for sure. Would you have any more, or do we want to do picks? Because this has been great. I mean, I could riff on this for hours. No more.
Going once, going twice.
All right. Well, I think that brings us around to picks time.
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
So let's see. So let's start with TJ this week.
Sure. So I'm going to pick, I'm going to keep a running theme going, but I'm going to pick There's Only Murders in the Building Season 2, which by the time this comes out, you'll be able to binge the whole Season 2. I made the grave mistake of starting the show when 9 out of 10 episodes were released.
Dun, dun, dun.
Which was just a tragic mistake that I binged the whole thing, and then I went to of course the one before episode ends on a cliffhanger. So then I go to hit the next button, and then it slowly dawns on me that that's not a next button for the last episode. And then I look and it's like, oh, it's not coming out until next Tuesday. And I'm just, I don't know. I'm devastated, especially for a show like that, right? Because the whole thing is it's just like a somewhat silly, comical murder mystery, but it builds on mysteries and intrigue. And but by the time you're listening to this, it'll all be available. So season 2 was equally as good as season 1, so I recommend it.
Nice.
Awesome. Okay, Paige.
My pick this week is going to be a show as well. It's a show that's been over for ages and ages, but my husband and I recently have been getting into the Star Trek theme of things. So we watched Star Trek Next Generation, which was the first 2 seasons were rough, but
until William Riker gets his beard, nothing is good. Nothing is good. It's
Patrick Stewart is great though. Love Sir Patrick Stewart.
True.
But we've been watching now Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which is
that's good.
Yeah, it spun off of I think Next Generation, and there were a couple of crossover episodes, so we've been into that recently, and it is much better from the beginning, and it's kind of fun because there's a lot more aliens who are just part of the regular cast, and it's been good. So have you seen it
before?
Sorry?
Is this your second? Have you seen it before? Is this your second time around, or is this your first time?
No, this is the first time watching it all. It's on Paramount Plus, so if anybody wants to just binge it, it's all there for the watching in letterbox form, 480 or 720 or whatever they're filming in. Right,
yeah.
But it holds up quite well, I will say. The CGI is not the best, but they just made a lot of the stuff themselves, for the sets and everything. So they did a pretty good job for what they had to work with at the time.
I've still never done the Star Trek. So
really?
Nothing other than the occasional, some of the newer movies I've seen, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Never the old shows though.
Interesting. Okay. So I love DS9. It's honestly my favorite of all of them, except for, I guess the newest one, the Strange New Worlds maybe is almost as good.
I heard Picard was also good. No,
I hated Picard so bad. It's so bad. But back to DS9 for a second. So later on, it gets very serial, like later in the series, and that's when it starts getting really, really good.
Yeah.
But there's this one episode, and it's like between Sisko and his son, and you'll see it when it starts. Like they build this like solar sailor together, and you will be crying your eyes out at the end of that show. It'll kill you. I mean, I cry every time I watch it, and I love it, but I cry so hard every time I see it. Have you seen it yet?
Yes, actually, we just watched that one the other day, a couple days ago.
Doesn't that just? Oh my God!
Yeah, it really gets you.
Really
all the feels.
Oh, everyone. Okay, I'm kind of bummed you didn't do a cooking recommendation because your oil recommendation from last week was so good, and thank you so much for that. I totally rocked. My recommendation, I guess I'll follow on a trend here. My recommendation for this week is a movie on Netflix called Day Shift. It has Jamie Foxx, Snoop Dogg, and it's a vampire horror comedy, but I'm a huge fight movie fan, like martial arts fan. Like it's not the violence that gets me. It's the sheer acrobatics of it. And watching it is like, whoa, like the wire work and all that. And when it's done really well, it's done really well. And this movie is that. I mean, this movie is kind of like a combination of like John Wick and like The Raid. This very weird kind of like Malaysian movie called The Raid from years ago, where like just awesome fighting. If you just want to like see, I think there's like YouTube like best of moments in The Raid, and the fights are just insane. But like I've never seen anything like this. Like it's like a combination of John Wick plus parkour fighting styles, and it is so nuts. And then it's kind of good. I mean, from a comedy, it's also got some good comedy moments and things like that. But anyway, my daughter and I just fired it up. Like we're just like, we literally hit the button like you never hit on Netflix, which is like the play anything button. Because I'm doing the dishes. I'm like, okay, we just need something on the TV, play something. And it came up, and we were just like instantly glued, and it was like done. Oh crap. But it was fun. It's just a fun Saturday afternoon movie. Jamie Foxx nails it. Snoop Dogg nails it. Snoop Dogg is actually better than I've ever seen him before. So yeah, it's a really good one.
Nice.
All right. Well, this has been super fun. I think it's been super helpful. Certainly things that I should probably gear up on myself. So, well, thank you guys. It's been an awesome episode.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
All right. See you next week.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.